Hey everybody, Frankie here from Prairie Home Crafts. I'd like to tell you that we are walking through a highly curated professional workspace, but it's not. It's my dirty garage where wood scraps live until the day they can redeem themselves. A while back, I built a laundry room countertop for my parents. They loved it, and I loved getting it out of my shop. But it left me with this awkward, heavy slab of melamine. Naturally, instead of throwing it away like a normal person, I decided it could redeem itself by turning into a massive, heavy, blindingly white crosscut sled for my table saw. Oh, and my dog Grizwold supervised the whole project. Let's get into it. Step 1 of building a crosscut sled is measuring the size you would like it to be. But most importantly, the size of the miter slots on your table saw. If you get this wrong, the sled won't slide. If you get it really wrong, you've just wasted a few hours making a very heavy cutting board. I found some scrap 3/4 inch oak and ripped it down into 2 rails. Then I hacked up the melamine into a base and 2 fences. At this point, everything was going suspiciously well, which usually means a disaster is looming just around the corner. And speaking of disaster, for those of you with a table saw, I have a couple questions for you. 1, why should you make a crosscut sled? And number 2, why is following my video tutorial going to save your thumbs from a disaster? Well, to answer question number 1, you can make those perfectly square cuts every time. It's easier to cut bulky pieces on either side of the blade, and you can have repeatable accuracy with no tape measure required once you clamp a jig in place. So, if you stick around until the very end, I can show you a super awesome safety feature I added to my crosscut sled that most people don't add, that your still attached opposable thumbs will thank me for later in life. You know, I thought there were no batteries required in operating a crosscut sled. There isn't. But this little hack saved me from running to the hardware store. To glue the rails to the bottom of the sled, they need to sit just slightly proud of the table saw top. Normal woodworkers would use washers or pennies to spacer them up, but because my shop organization is like a crime scene, I couldn't find any. What I did have was an obscene amount, almost suspicious amount, of coin cell batteries. Don't ask me why, I don't know. But they happened to be the exact depth that I needed. So if this woodworking channel thing doesn't pan out, I think I have a promising future in battery hoarding. Next, I applied some CA glue to the rails and carefully lowered the melamine slab. The goal here is to glue the rails to the wood and not permanently bond my new project to my table saw itself. Then we would have no slidey. Quick note here, the glue is just to hold the rails in place, so I can then drill pilot holes and properly attach the rails with some countersunk wood screws. So I'm going to rant here for a second about batteries. There is a specific kind of sickness that takes over my brain when I buy batteries. I'll need like a couple of them for maybe a tool or a remote or something, and I'll see the price for a small pack at the store and think, absolutely not. That is a ridiculous price, and I refuse to be extorted by big battery. So instead, I hit the internet, maybe the Zon, and I'll willingly spend actually more money to buy like a giant bucket of like a 80 or 100 off-brand batteries with some crazy name because the cost per battery is just better. So then that bucket gets here and sits on the shelf for years, and by the time I actually need to use more of those batteries, the whole lot of them has just completely lost its juice. So now they are literally just tiny, heavy cylinders of disappointment. So I throw them away, look at the price of a 2-pack, and get offended all over again, and then go buy a different bucket of off-brand garbage. Is anyone else trapped in this infinite loop of terrible math? Or are the rest of you just normal? I'd love to know about it in the comments. Batteries. Now back to woodworking. I tested the fit, and it was terrible. It had the gliding properties of a wet brick on sandpaper, which is typical. Too much friction, so I did what any desperate woodworker does. I glued some 120 grit sandpaper to a block and aggressively sanded the sides of the rails until they glided like butter without any play. This actually didn't take very long. I just like to exaggerate. You know, we're doing TV here. Give it another test fit, and this time the rails glided like butter with very, very little play. So now all we have to do is handsaw the excess oak ends off, and my cardio will be complete for the month. Win-win. Here you will notice I opted to cut through this oak with a utility knife instead of a saw. Gotcha. Of course I wasn't going to do that. I was just scoring a mark so that my saw would not wander when I started cutting. Next up was taking care of the front fence. I wanted some nice, comfortable hand cutouts so that I don't drop this beast or push it off the table accidentally. So I marked the layout and then ended up drilling out two massive 2.5-inch holes on either side of where the blade will come through. And then I connected those dots with the jigsaw, as you'll see. Here I'm just prepping for the hole saw cuts by doing some pilot holes so that the hole saw bit will guide directly into them. With the jigsaw, I'm going to follow these two lines that meet the diameters of each of these circles to turn two holes into one hole on either side. This actually will serve as a place for your hands as well as to slide clamps through when you want to clamp jigs to your crosscut sled. So I clamped my router upside down to my workbench. Is this safe? Probably not. Did it work? Flawlessly. Don't tell OSHA. The purpose of this is to make the handhold situation when operating the Crosscut Sled just that much smoother. And for those of you who haven't physically handled melamine with your hands, once you cut into that board, that wood chip part of it, man, it cuts up your hand something fierce. So later on, anywhere I was going to actually touch this thing with my hands, I recommend sanding it smooth so you don't end up with Splinterville and your hand kind of coming away looking like you've been playing with a porcupine. So I threw the back fence on first. I guess you can't say I literally threw it on. I clamped it perfectly in place, then drove some pilot holes through. Definitely want to countersink that so you don't have any drag on your table saw. Don't want to ruin your table saw. And the purpose of the back fence is to give the necessary cross support so that your sled remains flat and you can drive this thing through the blade first so it stays in one piece when you get the more important part that needs to be completely, perfectly square, the front fence in place. So you can see we're back here on the table saw and running the sled through the table saw blade to cut the kerf line, stopping just before the front. So don't go all the way through at this point. Now comes the most challenging part, which is aligning the front fence. If this fence isn't at a perfect 90-degree angle to the blade, every single cut you make for the rest of your life will be crooked. No pressure. To do this, I'm using the single screw pivot method. I am securing the left side with just one screw, and that would allow the right side to swing freely. So it's really not that big of a deal. You just put the fence basically square with the front of the base, clamp it in place, pilot, and drive a screw. This is actually into the left side, not the right side. It's just upside down right now. And then we're going to throw it back on the table saw and get it set up. So right now, all we have to do is get a square involved. We're going to use this square and rest it against the blade, and then push it and the fence so that the other side of the square is perfectly square with the square. We're squaring the square with the square and the fence and the square and the blade with the square. You get it? Once you have the fence referenced perfectly 90 to the blade, we clamp it in place, and then we can drive in the rest of the screws, which will secure this. Now, I don't glue this or anything because if we need to readjust later, we always can, which is great. And you might see some people who have done this and their fence has a bunch of screw holes in the bottom because they've probably had to readjust over the years. Because I expect this crosscut sled to last me a lifetime. So in the future, I'll unscrew the front fence, readjust, and make sure it is perfect once again. And if you check out my YouTube channel, you'll notice that I have used this crosscut sled with a bunch of projects, and it's still dialed in nicely. We are just about done, and now we can run that blade the rest of the way through so we can actually make some cuts all the way against the fence. Let's take a minute here and give this thing a go just to check for squareness. So here I grabbed a piece of scrap, made one cross cut, and let's check this cut against our squares. These are the squares I had handy at the time. Let's see if we need to make any adjustments. All right. Those all look pretty spot on to me. Now, before we call this done, we need to talk about safety. When you push a sled all the way through a cut, the spinning blade exits the back of the fence, right where you're going to want to rest your thumbs. To prevent me from having to learn how to tie my shoes with my own toes, I decided to add a 4x4 safety block. This added feature will allow the blade to just eat into the block, and my thumbs will stay attached to my hands. The block makes it literally physically impossible to put your thumbs where the blade will slide. So you're welcome. And now the moment of truth. We're going to raise the blade as high as it can go and drive the sled through and see if we're safe. And it looks like we are. See how you cannot put your thumbs anywhere near that blade. That is a very cheap and very effective safety feature. I highly recommend it. Okay, final cut, and here we go. Checking for square. And look at that. Absolutely perfect. Not bad for a pile of trash, some expired coin batteries, and a sketchy upside-down router. So, if you want to see more builds where I barely know what I'm doing but somehow end up with a working tool, hit that subscribe button, and my dog Grizwold and I will see you on the next one. This is Frankie from Prairie Home Crafts, and remember, there are no mistakes, only smaller projects. See you next time.